In late September, Elizabeth Kane took a leave of absence from her teaching position at Redwood High School and drove 423 miles to the house she swore she'd never set foot in again. She told her colleagues she was going to handle some estate matters after her mother passed. That was technically true. But what she didn't say, what none of them would have understood, is that she hadn't been back to that house since the night she was 14 years old. Since the fire. Since her sister vanished without a trace, the house had been sitting empty for nearly 2 decades. Its white siding, weathered gray by years of wind and rain. When Elizabeth pulled up the gravel driveway, her tires stirred up dust that coated the windows of her rental car. The porch steps sagged with rot. The paint had peeled away from the columns. But the house itself still stood. It's like something too stubborn or too haunted to fall. She sat in the car for a long time with the engine running, staring at the structure that had loomed in the background of every nightmare she'd had since she was a teenager. The official records said her younger sister Melanie died in the fire that gutted the upstairs hallway. But no body had ever been found. Just ash, just speculation. Just the kind of hole in the truth that festers over time. Elizabeth never believed her sister died in that fire, and now that their mother was going after years of silence, denial, and heavy medication, Elizabeth could finally look for answers. Without being gaslit, threatened, or institutionalized, she killed the engine and stepped out of the car. The key still worked. Inside. The air was musty, thick with the smell of mildew and memory. Elizabeth moved slowly, flashlight in hand, her boots creaking on warped floorboards. Her plan was to stay for 2 nights at most, go through what remained of her mother's belongings, sell the house to the first investor who'd take it. But something about the silence in that house made her pause. Shadows felt too heavy, too still, like they were listening. Upstairs, the wallpaper had peeled into curls. The bathroom mirror was cracked straight through the center like a scar. Her old bedroom, still painted lavender, looked smaller than she remembered. A few stuffed animals sat on the window ledge, dusty and motionless. As if frozen in the moment she last saw them, Melanie's room was padlocked from the outside. Elizabeth stood in front of it for a long time, remembering the sound of her sister's laughter echoing down the hall. The lock was new, heavy-duty, industrial. Her mother must have added it some time after Elizabeth moved out. That was strange. Disturbing, even. There had never been any reason to secure that door. Melanie's room was where the fire had started. It should have been destroyed. But from the hallway, Elizabeth could see the door was intact, clean, almost untouched by time. And that was the first sign that something was wrong. It took her half an hour to pry the lock off with a crowbar she found in the garage. When the door finally creaked open, Elizabeth felt an unnatural chill rush out like a breath that had been held too long. She stepped inside, expecting soot or ashes. Instead, she found a preserved shrine. Melanie's room looked exactly as it had in 2004. The pink bedspread was made neatly. Books lined the shelf. Dolls in plastic cases smiled down from high ledges. On the dresser sat a music box Elizabeth hadn't seen in 20 years, the same one that used to play a lullaby every night before bed. When she lifted the lid, it still worked. The tiny ballerina twirled, and the song whispered its hollow notes through the silence. Elizabeth's breath caught. She felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear exactly, but a weight. A pressure. Like something beneath her memories was trying to surface. On the desk sat a spiral notebook she didn't recognize. It was wrapped in plastic and sealed with duct tape. Her mother's handwriting covered the outside. Do not open, danger. Keep seeing /slowly 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 //////////////// her mother's handwriting. Her mother's handwriting covered the outside. Her mother's handwriting covered the outside. Do not open, danger. Keep // // // // // // // // // // Resher // her we have dead. running her fingers over the writing. The notebook was child-sized, decorated with cartoon stars and moons. Something about it felt wrong. Not just eerie, but intentional. As if someone wanted her to find it, but also feared what it contained. She took it back to her old bedroom, sat cross-legged on the floor, cut the plastic away with a pocket knife. The notebook was filled with Melanie's handwriting, but the entries weren't what Elizabeth expected from a 10-year-old dot. They were fragmented, obsessive, repetitive. It lives in the attic. It wears Dad's face, but it isn't him. Mom doesn't see it. She says I'm lying. It watches me through the vents. It knows my name. It knows yours too. Elizabeth turned page after page, her stomach twisting. The entries became darker, more frantic. Symbols appeared in the margins drawn in ink, pencil, and even what looked like dried blood. Repeated phrases filled the last dozen pages. Don't go into the attic. Don't go into the attic. Don't go into the attic. And then finally, if I disappear, it wasn't the fire. Find the crawl space. Look beneath the mirror. I tried to hide it, but it's not enough. Tell Liz I'm sorry. I didn't mean to let it out. Elizabeth dropped the notebook like it had burned her. That night, she didn't sleep. The house groaned around her like it was remembering too. She sat on the floor of her childhood room with a bottle of wine and the notebook open beside her, trying to make sense of it. Her mother's journals buried deep in her closet revealed more unsettling details. Mentions of Melanie's nightmares. The other voice she spoke in, the dead things found under her bed. One entry from March 2004 was especially alarming. Melanie says the mirror in the attic shows the wrong reflection. She says it talks to her now. I've locked the attic door. I've told her it's just imagination. But the cat won't go up there anymore. And the smell. God help me, the smell. Elizabeth went upstairs around 3 a.m., drawn by something between dread and necessity. The attic door was at the end of the hallway, behind a faded tapestry. It had always been locked. Her father said it was unsafe. That was a lie. The lock was only there after Melanie disappeared. When she pushed the tapestry aside, the door was wide open. No dust on the knob. No hinges creaking, as if someone had gone in just minutes before. Elizabeth shone her flashlight. Up the narrow staircase, Melanie. She whispered before she could stop herself. Nothing answered. But the air felt colder. The attic was nothing like she remembered. Instead of cluttered storage and boxes, the space was bare, clean, and empty, except for a full-length mirror propped against the far wall. It was ornate, gilded. Elizabeth didn't recall ever seeing it before. Its surface shimmered oddly in the dim light. She approached slowly, her footsteps loud in the silence. The mirror didn't show her reflection. It showed her sister Melanie. Stood there, 10 years old, in the same pajamas she'd worn the night of the fire. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were wide. Her mouth opened like she was trying to scream, but no sound came through. Then the mirror cracked. Splintering down the center, Elizabeth staggered back, heart racing. The attic darkened, and the temperature dropped fast. A smell hit her then, sweet and foul, like rotting fruit and old perfume. She turned to run, but the attic door slammed shut behind her. For a moment, Elizabeth thought she heard something breathing behind the mirror, or beneath it. She remembered Melanie's notebook beneath the mirror. She crossed the attic floor and gripped the gilded frame. It was heavier than it looked. With effort, she tilted it forward and saw the opening. A crawl space, no larger than a dog door. Covered by a wooden hatch sealed with 6 nails, Elizabeth didn't think. She just acted. She pried them loose, one by one, with the claw end of a nearby hammer. When she lifted the hatch, the smell intensified. Something organic, wet, cold. The flashlight beam revealed a passageway low, narrow and lined with some kind of padding. Soundproofing, maybe. She couldn't tell. It stretched deeper than it should have, like it didn't fit within the boundaries of the house. Something skittered in the darkness. Elizabeth crawled inside. She didn't know how long she was in the tunnel. The air was thick and stale. Her knees scraped against the floor. Somewhere deeper in the passage, she could hear a voice, a girl's voice, singing a lullaby, the same one from the music box. Elizabeth followed it. even though every instinct told her to turn back. The crawl space widened after about 15 feet into a small chamber, bare walls, wooden beams, a single mattress on the ground, and on that mattress, something lay curled in the fetal position. Not a child, not an adult, something in between. Its skin was gray and cracked. Its limbs were too long. Its hair was thick and matted. But when it looked up, Elizabeth saw her sister's eyes. "Liz," it whispered in a voice that sounded like hers and something else layered beneath. Then it began to cry. Elizabeth Kane didn't remember crawling backward. One moment she was staring into the face of a creature that should not have existed, something both horrifying and heartbreakingly familiar, and the next, she was in the attic, the crawl space. Hatch still open behind her, breathing like she'd sprinted a mile uphill. Her flashlight lay on its side. The beam cast trembling shadows across the walls. The mirror, now cracked top to bottom, reflected nothing but darkness. Elizabeth shut the crawlspace hatch with trembling hands, shoved the mirror back into place, and staggered out of the attic. Slamming the door behind her, she didn't stop until she was back downstairs. Curled on the couch in the living room with every light turned on and a fireplace poker gripped tight in her hands, like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality, the thing in the crawlspace had said her name, Liz. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't grief, and it damn sure wasn't just an animal. She knew her sister's voice. She had taught her to read, tied her shoelaces, walked her to the bus stop for the first time. Elizabeth had carried the guilt of not saving her for 20 years, but Melanie hadn't died. She had been left behind. At dawn, Elizabeth drove into the nearest town, Red Pines, a 2-stoplight community nestled among the Oregon woods. Nothing had changed since her childhood. Same boarded-up gas station, same diner with the same grease-stained blinds. She stopped at the sheriff's office, not because she expected help, but because she needed someone to tell her she wasn't. Crazy Sheriff Mark Rudd was nearing 70, all white beard and faded uniform. He'd been a deputy back when Melanie disappeared and hadn't aged a day in personality or posture. When Elizabeth told him she was back to close out the house, he grunted something resembling sympathy. When she asked about Melanie, the grunt turned into silence. "You digging into that again?" he asked. "Sheriff, I don't think she died in the fire. We didn't find a body because there wasn't much left of the room. That whole wing of the house collapsed, but her room is intact." He squinted at her. "That's so?" "Saw it myself. No burn marks. The furniture's untouched." "That ain't possible." Elizabeth leaned forward. "Have there been other cases like this? Other kids who went missing, but the parents acted like nothing happened? Or rooms that stayed untouched by fires?" "Miss Kane," he said carefully, "are you sure you're taking your medication?" Elizabeth stood. "Thanks for your time. The library was more helpful." The local archives had a stack of clippings from 2004, detailing the house fire, the investigation, and her mother's short-lived stay at a psychiatric facility after the event. Most articles parroted the official line, "Accidental electrical. Fire. 1 missing child." No suspects. But a yellowed article from a smaller paper, the Red Pines Ledger, had a different tone. It was written by a journalist named Caleb Moore. The headline read, "Fire at Kane home raises questions about missing girls' whereabouts." The piece was skeptical. Caleb had interviewed neighbors, including an elderly man who swore he saw someone watching the house the night before the fire. The article referenced unsubstantiated rumors of ritualistic symbols found in the attic, a detail that was never included in the police reports. Elizabeth found herself dialing the number listed at the bottom of the article before she could stop herself. It disconnected immediately. So she drove to the address listed for Moore's editorial office, which turned out to be a converted church on the edge of town. The bell tower had collapsed years ago, and a hand-painted sign hung above the door. The Ledger Archives, appointments, O&LY. She knocked. The man who opened the door looked like someone who had seen too much and gotten too little in return. Caleb Moore wore a corduroy blazer over a tattered concert tee, and his eyes had the weary alertness of someone who slept with one eye open. "Let me guess," he said. "You're Elizabeth Kane." Inside the dusty archives, Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee so strong it felt like punishment. Elizabeth sat across from him at a table littered with boxers, labeled missing persons and unexplained events, red pines. "I've been waiting for you to come back," he said. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I covered your sister's case back in the day. People thought I was reaching, said the fire was tragic, nothing more. But I knew your mother was hiding something, and I wasn't the only one." He opened one of the boxes and pulled out a folder labeled the Hollow House Cases. "Your house wasn't the first," he said. Over the next hour, Caleb laid out a pattern Elizabeth had never heard before, going back nearly 70 years. 5 other houses in Oregon and one in Northern California had experienced eerily similar events: children disappearing without explanation, sudden fires that left bedrooms untouched while the surrounding structure burned, parents descending into paranoid psychosis, claiming voices in the walls or shadows behind the mirror, strange symbols found in attics, basements, or crawl spaces, some drawn in ink, others in blood. All the incidents occurred in isolated homes built before 1950, all within a 100-mile radius, all involving children between the ages of 9 and 11. Caleb opened a separate manila folder and handed her a photograph. "That's the attic mirror from the Andros case. 1973. Look familiar?" It was nearly identical to the one in her own attic. "I don't know what it is," Caleb said, "but I think your sister might be the only person who ever came back from it." Back at the house, Elizabeth stood at the bottom of the attic stairs with a backpack full of supplies: flashlight, first aid kit, protein bars, rope, and her father's old hunting knife. She didn't know what she was planning exactly: rescue, confrontation. But she knew she couldn't ignore what she'd seen in that crawlspace. Not anymore. Before climbing, she pulled out her phone and left a voicemail for Caleb Moore. "If I don't call you in the next 2 hours, something happened to me. I'm going back into the crawlspace. I need to know what's beyond it." I think the phone cut out. Not went dead, not low battery, just silence. Like the house had swallowed the signal. The attic was colder than it should have been. A thin layer of frost coated the floorboards around the mirror. Elizabeth moved the frame aside and opened the crawlspace hatch again. The smell hit her immediately: decay and something sweet, almost floral. She crawled in, this time bringing the knife and the rope. The tunnel was darker. The soundproofing on the walls was torn in places, revealing claw marks underneath. She passed the place where she'd seen the figure last time, Maloney, or the thing that wore her face, but the mattress was empty. Footprints led deeper into the passage. She followed. The passage ended at a drop-off, a vertical shaft with wooden rungs nailed to the wall. Elizabeth hesitated, shining the light downward. The bottom was too far to see. The air smelled ancient. She climbed. The shaft opened into a subterranean chamber, unlike anything she'd expected. The walls were lined with stone. Blackened candles sat in carved niches. And in the center of the room stood a door. It was old, much older than the house. Made of dark wood reinforced with iron, and covered in carving symbols she recognized. From Melanie's notebook? Spiral patterns. Open eyes. Something that looked like a mouth with too many teeth. Elizabeth stepped closer. The door had no handle, just a slot at chest height, like a letterbox. She knelt to peer inside, and saw something. Looking back at her, not human, not even pretending to be. The eye blinked sideways. Elizabeth stumbled backward, heart pounding as a voice whispered from the other side, faint, distant, yet unmistakably real. "Liz, help me." She ran, back up the shaft, through the crawlspace, into the attic. Down the stairs, she didn't stop until she reached the front yard, where the sun had just begun to set. Standing there, gasping for breath, she realized something horrible. The house was watching her. She could feel it in the walls, the windows, the very air. Not metaphorically, literally, as if the house itself had become an organism, a predator. And now that it knew she'd seen the door, now that she'd heard Melanie's voice, it wasn't going to let her go again. not without a fight. 2 hours later, Elizabeth sat in Caleb Moore's office with her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of coffee she didn't drink. "I found something," she said. "A door. Underground." Caleb didn't flinch. "I believe you," he said. He pulled out another file. One she hadn't seen before. "There's an old story passed down in this region," he said. "Not many people talk about it anymore. But back in the 20s and 30s, locals believed in something called the Hollow, supposedly. It was a place, another world or dimension that mirrored ours but was broken. Twisted." Elizabeth felt her skin crawl. "Some said certain houses were built over thin places, where the barrier between here and the Hollow wore thin, where something could come through." Caleb handed her a photograph, black and white, group of children, in front of a farmhouse, all but one smiling. The one who wasn't wore a blindfold. Scrawled beneath the image in ink, "Only the blind ones are safe." "The Hollow sees through eyes. What does it want?" Elizabeth asked, barely whispering. Caleb shrugged. "That's the part no one agrees on. Some say it feeds on memory. Others say it replaces people with things that look like them. But the one consistent detail in every story," he leaned forward, "is that it never lets you take anything back." Elizabeth's blood went cold. "But Melanie, she's still in there." "Then you better hope she's still your sister." 3 days after Elizabeth Kane returned to her childhood home, the house began to change, not subtly, not metaphorically. Literally, the floorboards warped overnight in the upstairs hallway, bowing upward in a way that couldn't be explained by age or weather. One of the upstairs windows, painted shut since the 1980s, had been found wide open, the lock twisted completely off. And the mirror in the attic, once cracked, was suddenly whole again. Elizabeth discovered this last detail just before dawn. She'd gone upstairs with the intention of checking the crawl space one last time, maybe even boarding it up. But when she reached the attic, she stopped cold. The mirror had healed. No fracture. No shimmer. No sign it had ever been damaged at. All, it showed her reflection now. But not quite correctly. Her eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too wide. Unblinking. She backed away slowly, and for a split second, her reflection didn't move. She fled the attic and called Caleb Moore from the kitchen, panic rising in her chest. "It's mimicking me," she whispered. "The mirror. It's copying me, but wrong." Caleb's voice came through tight and alert. "Get out of the house, right now." "I can't." "Why the hell not?" Elizabeth glanced over her shoulder at the staircase. "Because I think Melanie's still in there." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Then we need help," he said. "Not just the cops or the historical society. I mean real help. People who've dealt with this kind of thing before. You know people like that?" "I know someone. But she's not easy to reach." 3 hours later, Elizabeth was sitting at a booth in the back of a run-down diner on Route 47, waiting for someone Caleb only referred to as Dr. Hazel March. "She's not a psychiatrist," he'd said, "and she's definitely not licensed. But she's studied the Hollow phenomenon longer than anyone I know. If anyone can explain what's happening in that house, it's her." Hazel March arrived precisely at 11:17 a.m. She was in her late 60s, with long gray hair braided down her back and the kind of presence that made the room quiet without trying. She wore a worn wool coat over jeans and hiking boots and carried a leather satchel that clinked when she set it down. "You must be Elizabeth," she said, sitting across from her. "I guess Caleb gave you the basics." Hazel didn't nod. She just opened the satchel and pulled out a folded map. It wasn't a road map. It was a hand-drawn grid of the area surrounding Red Pines. It's marked with X's and notations in faded ink. "This region has 6 known hollow sites," Hazel said. "Your house is the 7th. "How do you know that?" "'Cause I've been tracking them for 40 years. Hazel spent the next hour explaining more than Elizabeth ever wanted to know. According to her, hollow houses were rare. They didn't appear on any official registry or map, and they didn't follow traditional geological or magnetic patterns, but they shared key traits. They were always built on land once considered cursed or sacred by local tribes. They always involved a child between the ages of 9 and 11, and they always had a mirror. The mirror, Hazel said, isn't just decoration, it's the door. Elizabeth felt her mouth go dry. A door to where? Hazel looked at her steadily. Somewhere. On the other side of reason, a place built out of memory and grief. It imitates. It reflects. But it doesn't understand. What does it want? Hazel hesitated. I don't think it wants anything in the way we understand want. It's more like it reaches. And when it touches something it likes, it holds on. Elizabeth swallowed. My sister went through, didn't she? Hazel nodded slowly. Probably the question is whether she came back. Back at the house, Elizabeth opened her mother's closet for the first time. She found records. Dozens of them. Not music journals. Her mother had kept detailed logs of Melanie's behavior before the fire. There were entries about her daughter talking to someone in the mirror, waking up in the middle of the night with blood on her hands and no memory of how it got there, whispering in voices that weren't hers, drawing the same symbol over and over, the spiral mouthy that Elizabeth had seen in the crawl space. One entry chilled her to the bone. It says Liz is next, that she's older and stronger, that she'll understand the rules better. I've sealed the attic. I've nailed the hatch shut. But it keeps asking for her anyway. It calls her name in my dreams. Another, Melanie is gone. Not lost. Gone. What's walking around isn't her anymore. I've seen its eyes. I should have done something sooner. I just wanted my little girl back. The final entry was dated 3 days before her mother died. I see it in the mirror again. And I know what it wants. If Liz comes back here, if she ever finds the crawl space, she needs to understand this. You don't rescue people from the hollow. You trade for them. Elizabeth sat down hard on the floor, the journal trembling in her hands. That night, Hazel returned with Caleb and a canvas bag full of instruments that Elizabeth didn't recognize. Metal rods, vials of white ash, a mirror wrapped in black cloth, and a device that looked like an old radio with a series of rotating dials. Are we exercising something? Elizabeth asked. Hazel's face remained solemn. No, we're measuring. If the house is thinned enough to let something through, we need to know where and how far the breach is spread. They worked through the night. Hazel's reader picked up frequencies low, erratic pulses of static that changed when moved near the attic door. The mirror refused to reflect Hazel at all, and she tried to photograph it with a digital camera. The image came back, scrambled, and distorted. Just after 3 a.m., the attic door slammed itself shut behind them, and something spoke from the mirror. A voice made of many voices. Old, childlike, familiar, foreign. Elizabeth. Elizabeth. We remember you. Caleb recoiled. What the hell was that? Hazel stepped forward. Don't respond to it. But Elizabeth was already trembling, her mouth opened. Where's Melanie? The mirror went still. Then slowly, it showed her sister again, but older, not 10 years old, -20-9, thin, pale, standing in a place that looked almost like the attic but with no windows. There's no light, just endless gray behind her. Moved, but the mirror made no sound. Hazel grabbed Elizabeth's arm. That's not her. Yes, it is, Elizabeth said. Look at her eyes. Those could be anyone's eyes. Elizabeth turned. No, they're mine. And she was right. Hazel relented by morning. If we're going to bring her back, if there's even a chance there's only one way, tell me. We find the breach. We open it. But you have to go in alone. Elizabeth stared. Why? Because if it knows I'm helping you, it will lie. It will change the rules. It only wants people who believe they're acting on their own. And if I go in, you leave a tether behind. Something alive. Something with memory. Elizabeth frowned. What does that mean? Hazel opened her bag and removed a mason jar filled with something that looked like dried petals and black soil, bloodroot, ash, sage, and memory dust. We burn this in the mirror room and keep the fire going. As long as it burns, the tether holds. And if it goes out, then you're just another shadow in the hollow. They prepared everything by nightfall. Hazel created a protective circle with salt and red thread around the mirror. Elizabeth wrapped her wrist with a charm. Made from her and Melanie's old bracelets twisted together like a lifeline. Caleb handled the fire. Hazel calibrated the reader. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the mirror shimmered and opened, not like a door but like water parting in reverse. Elizabeth looked at Hazel. Hazel nodded once. "Don't trust what you see," she said. "And don't speak your full name while you're in there. It listens." Then Elizabeth stepped through. For a moment, there was nothing. Then cold, endless. Gray-jawed, she stood in a place that looked like the house but wasn't. The walls were translucent. The doors were too tall. There were no windows. "Goes Melanie," she called, her voice small and trembling. "Liz?" The voice came from the hallway. Her sister, now older, stood at the far end. They ran toward each other and embraced. She was cold? Too cold? "Are you real?" Elizabeth whispered. "I think so," Melanie said. "I don't know anymore. Time doesn't work here." "Why didn't you come back?" "I tried. It wouldn't let me. It likes me." Then she said something that stopped Elizabeth's heart. "It won't let us both leave." The walls groaned. Mirror rippled, and the voice returned, deeper this time. "You can have her. You know the price. You know the rules. Trade, trade, trade." Elizabeth looked at her sister, tears in her eyes, and realized she hadn't come to rescue her. She'd come to decide who got to leave. Elizabeth didn't answer right away. She couldn't. She stood frozen in that colorless corridor beyond the mirror, staring into her sister's pale face. Melanie looked like a ghost, not in the spectral, transparent sense, but in the human way, someone hollowed out by time, grief, and isolation. Her hair was longer. Her eyes were sunken. She trembled slightly as if unused to standing upright. Behind them, the hollow shifted. It wasn't a place so much as a sensation. There were walls and corners and doorways, but they weren't stable. They flickered, bent inward, breathed. The shadows moved in ways that didn't match Elizabeth's flashlight. Something watched them from beneath the floor. The same voice whispered again. "Trade." Elizabeth stepped in front of her sister, her heart hammering. "I'm not making a trade. We're both leaving." The voice laughed. It was a layered, broken. "Sound like someone scratching vinyl backward over a recording of children crying?" "No. You know the rules." Melanie gripped her wrist. "It doesn't lie, Liz. You don't have to believe it." "I've been here for 20 years, Melanie said quietly. "Doesn't lie. It just twists." Back in the attic, Hazel and Caleb watched the tether. The fire had changed color. It burned deep blue now, with streaks of green. The smoke curled straight up, ignoring the air currents. Hazel frowned. "That's too fast," she muttered. "It shouldn't be reacting yet." Caleb checked the mirror. The surface still rippled. No image, no sound. He turned to Hazel. "What happens if the hollow changes the rules?" Hazel looked up slowly. "Then Elizabeth never comes back." The hollow. Time bent. Elizabeth couldn't tell how long she and Elnie had been moving through the warped halls of the mirror world version of their childhood home. Each door led somewhere different. A corridor of bleeding wallpaper, a room that stretched for miles. A nursery with no windows and a ceiling that breathed in and out. Melanie guided her through it. "This place is made of memory," she explained. "But not your memory. Its version of yours." They passed through what looked like their old living room, except the fireplace was 10 feet tall, and the wallpaper was covered in handwriting. Elizabeth moved closer, squinting. It was all her. Mother's writing. "Don't look in the mirror. Don't believe what it shows. Don't speak your name." Elizabeth's stomach churned. "What is this?" She whispered. Melanie didn't answer, because someone else had entered the room. It looked like their father. Same flannel shirt, same receding hairline, same kind weathered face, except the eyes were completely black, and it smiled too wide. "Lizzie," it said. Elizabeth stumbled backward. "You're not real." Took a step forward. "You remember when you broke your arm falling off the swing set? I carried you all the way to the car. You were bleeding, crying. But you didn't let go of that frog you caught. That was you, brave little Lizzie. Stop, Elizabeth whispered. I tucked you in every night. I read you Goodnight Moon until you were 12. You told me you'd read it to your kids someday. Melanie stepped between them. It's not him. Don't talk to it. Elizabeth felt the memory swelling behind her ribs, sharp and bright. But then the voice changed. It hissed. She's not Melanie, you know? She changed a long time ago. You're not saving her. You're just inviting her home. Elizabeth grabbed her sister's hand and ran the halls twisted again. This time, they arrived in a version of Melanie's childhood bedroom. Everything was preserved but wrong. The colors were slightly off, the proportions distorted. The stuffed animals sat upright on the shelf, all turned toward the door, all smiling, all watching. Elizabeth's flashlight flickered. Melanie collapsed onto the bed. I can't go farther. She said, this is where it started. This is where it always ends. Elizabeth knelt beside her. We're leaving. Together. Melanie shook her head slowly. You don't understand. I didn't survive the fire, Liz. Not really. I think it didn't kill me. It used me. I've been a door. What does that mean? Let it through. I'll let it wear me. Elizabeth backed up. No, you're my sister. Melanie looked at her with tears in her eyes. I don't know if I still am. In the attic, the fire flared. Hazel stood up fast. It's changing, she said. The mirror pulsed. Then Elizabeth's voice came through, but not from the mirror, from beneath. The floorboards faint, garbled. Hazel, Caleb, help. Caleb looked at Hazel. Was that really her? Hazel didn't answer instead. She reached for a bag and pulled out a small tin whistle carved with runes. If the hollow's using her voice, she said, we're running out of time. Inside the hollow, the world collapsed. The walls peeled away into screaming faces. The floor cracked open into blackness. Elizabeth clung to Melanie. But something was pulling her away, not physically, but emotionally, psychologically. The hollow was whispering through every memory. She had her sister lying, her mother screaming, her father burning. You never came back, it whispered. You let them die. You let her in. Elizabeth shut her eyes. None of that is real, she said, but she couldn't be sure. The hollow was too convincing, too cruel. Hazel began the ritual. The whistle's sound was nearly inaudible to human ears. But the mirror screamed. It cracked. A black liquid oozed from its corners. Caleb flinched. Is that blood? Hazel shook her head. It's memory. Then she called into the mirror. Elizabeth, you're tethered. Come back. Elizabeth felt the pull, like a rope wrapped around her chest. Melanie gripped her arm. I can't leave, she said. Double quotes. Yes, you can. You don't understand. If I leave, it'll follow. It'll wear me again. Elizabeth stared at her, and in that moment, she knew. Her sister was telling the truth. If Melanie left the hollow would come with her, and it would have. Her face. You have to let me go, Melanie whispered. No. Then everyone else dies. Elizabeth trembled. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist, the one tied to Melanie's from their childhood. She took it off, wrapped it around Melanie's wrist instead. Tell me something only you'd know, Elizabeth said. Melanie's lip trembled. When I was 6, I tried to run away. I packed cookies and a flashlight and hid in the crawl space. You found me 2 hours later crying because I forgot my toothbrush. Elizabeth smiled through tears. Then she stepped back. I'll be back for you. Melanie shook her head. There won't be a next time. The hollow screamed again. The bracelet glowed, and Elizabeth woke up in the attic. She gasped flat on her back, Hazel kneeling beside her. The fire was gone. The mirror was cracked again, but her hand still held the other half of the bracelet. Caleb helped her sit up. Did you find her? Elizabeth nodded. She's alive. Hazel frowned. Was she real? Elizabeth turned to the mirror. She's still in there, and she kept it trapped. If she ever leaves, it gets out. So what now? Caleb asked. Elizabeth stood her. Eyes hard, we make sure that mirror never opens again. They sealed the attic with steel bolts. ritual carvings. Layers of concrete and salt and fire. But the mirror remains behind the wall. Cracked. Watching, and if you stand too close, some say it whispers your name. The days that followed were the quietest the house had ever been. Too quiet. After Elizabeth returned from the hollow, the mirror in the attic remained dormant, the light no longer bent around it. The shadows didn't breathe. But Elizabeth felt the tension in the walls. The stillness wasn't safety. It was silence before another storm. Hazel and Caleb stayed for 3 more days, finishing the protective seal over the attic entrance. They followed protocols Hazel claimed dated back to Eastern European wartime black site containments. Salt, bloodroot, sacred iron, and markings in languages Elizabeth couldn't read. Hazel painted them over after. Better not to. Give it the satisfaction of knowing we're scared, she said. But Elizabeth wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. Hazel left the morning of the 4th day, returning to her trailer in northern Idaho with a promise. If it changes, if it speaks, if it moves, you call me. But if it's quiet, let it stay that way. We don't poke it. Not unless we're prepared to bleed. Elizabeth nodded. Caleb lingered another night, helping patch up the hallway floors and replace the back door, which had warped shut during one of the hollow's early pulses. You're really staying here? He asked. I need to, Elizabeth said. I don't know what's coming, but I want to be here if it starts again. He looked like he wanted to argue, then just nodded. I'll check in every day. You stop answering, I'll come running. With fire and friends. They hugged. Then Elizabeth was alone again. She kept a journal. Not a notebook like Melanie's, not hidden or secret. Just a spiral-bound diary she picked up at the Red Pines gas station, writing every day at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. observations, feelings, temperature fluctuations, electrical oddities, color of her dreams. October 18th. Temperature in attic. 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Main floor, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Heard whispering around 3:14 a.m. Couldn't identify source. Dreamed of Melanie again? She looked older, still wearing the bracelet. Said she found a door I never opened. By the end of the 1st week. The journal was 63 pages long. By the end of the 2nd, the whispers returned. It started small. One night, Elizabeth heard her name from the far corner of the house, where the stairs met the basement door. She went to investigate and found the door ajar. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that the hinges were missing completely. The door had no way to swing open. The next morning, hinges were back and the door was sealed shut. She didn't touch it. Then came the messages, scrawled in. Ash across the bathroom mirror. You came back, so can I? She tried to wipe it clean, but the ash wouldn't smudge. When she returned 20 minutes later with a bucket of bleach water, the writing was gone. 2 days later, she found a note slid under the door to Melanie's old room. The paper was yellowed, torn from one of their childhood storybooks. On it, a single line in handwriting Elizabeth recognized as her own. You promised. Hazel told her to avoid the basement. That was where the boundary would be thinnest now. Not because of anything ritualistic, but because of Melanie's voice echoing from below. The hollow knew it had been heard there. It would concentrate around places it had once spoken through. But Elizabeth had started hearing things in the basement again. Not voices, but even words. Music. The lullaby. The one from the music box. And it was getting louder. One night, just after midnight, Elizabeth stood at the top of the basement stairs with a baseball bat in her hand and her phone recording. In the other, she turned on her flashlight, took a breath, and descended. The basement was dry, dark, and empty. But in the corner, behind a shelf of rusted paint cans, something had changed. The wall had cracked open. A narrow vertical line ran from the ceiling to the floor, as if a blade had split the concrete down the center. Cold air flowed from the gap. Elizabeth stepped closer. She didn't want to, but she did. Inside the crack was a second mirror, not full dash-sized handheld, shaped like an oval with an iron frame, lodged halfway into the foundation like it had been placed there on purpose. Or grown there, and in the glass a door, not like the one in the below. This was different. Older. Wider. Covered in vines. A child. Stood in front of it, blonde, thin, familiar. She turned and looked directly at Elizabeth and whispered, "Help me. Open it." Elizabeth called Hazel. Hazel didn't answer, so she called Caleb. He drove straight over. They stood in the basement at 2:46 a.m., staring at the handheld mirror embedded in the wall. "You're sure it was Melanie?" he asked. "I think so." "You don't know?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I don't think it's the hollow this time." "Then what is it?" She hesitated. "I think it's something older." Caleb dug around the basement and discovered something strange. Behind the mirror, on the other side of the wall, was an old storage room that hadn't been listed on. The property's blueprints was hidden behind a false wall installed decades ago, likely by Elizabeth's grandfather. Inside, boxes of journals, all written by different people. Different handwriting, different dates. One from 1937, another from 1952, one that was so old. The ink had bled into the page like skin, but they all had something in common. They referenced the same. "We are not the one in the attic, not the one in the wall." A third one. Bigger, buried. Caleb found a sketch in one of the journals, a circular mirror inlaid into the ground, surrounded by 12 stone pillars. The caption beneath, "The root got Hazel, returned the next morning." She took one look at the handheld mirror and stepped back fast. "This is worse than I thought," she said. "You know what it is?" Elizabeth asked. Hazel nodded slowly. "Some mirrors open into the hollow," she said. "Others go deeper." "What?" "Into something called the root. It's not a place. It's a root system, an underground network of memory, trauma, and decay. The hollow grows out of it like a tree. The root is the source." "And the door Melanie showed me?" "Could be an exit," Hazel said. "Could be a trap. But if it's a door, maybe we could pull her out for good." Hazel didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her satchel and pulled out an iron compass. The needle spun in circles. The root distorts time and direction. "If we follow her into that door, there's no guarantee we'll find anything on the other side." Elizabeth looked at the mirror. "Then we make our own rules." They started preparations for a descent. Hazel mapped the house's history based on the journals they'd recovered, cross-referencing each with known hollow activity. All signs pointed to something sealed beneath the foundation, an older structure predating the house, maybe even predating the town. "You think there's something buried under here?" Caleb asked. Hazel looked grim. "I think your house was built on top of a wound." They broke ground that evening, underneath the foundation, beneath layers of concrete and rusted pipe. They found stairs, stone, crumbling, leading down into a black void. Elizabeth stood at the top with her flashlight, breathing in the smell of Earth's mildew and something else, rotten sugar. She turned to Hazel and Caleb. "If we don't come back, we'll come back," Caleb said. Hazel placed a charm in Elizabeth's hand. "For the root," she said, "you'll need more than fire. You'll need truth. Hold this. It remembers." Elizabeth pocketed it, then stepped into the dark. The descent was slow. The air got colder the deeper they went. Not just temperature, but sensation. Memory faded around the edges. Names felt less certain. Directions bent. Caleb vomited halfway down. Hazel kept them grounded with a chant in a language Elizabeth didn't recognize. Then the stairs ended, and the stone pillars began. 12 of them, each carved with symbols that made Elizabeth's teeth ache. In the center, the root gate, a mirror the size of a swimming pool. Perfectly still. Embedded in the ground, it reflected nothing. Hazel stepped back. "This is where the hollow was born." Elizabeth moved forward. Kneeling beside the mirror, she placed the charm in the center, and the surface rippled. A face appeared. Melanie, older. Still crying, but not alone. Hands reached up behind her, twisted, blackened, pulling her down. "Liz," she whispered. Please, don't leave me." Elizabeth turned to Caleb and Hazel. I'm going in. Hazel grabbed her arm. Don't speak your name, I remember. What? Hazel looked at her with haunted eyes. If she's already part of it, you won't be able to tell. Elizabeth stepped into the route and vanished. The moment Elizabeth stepped into the route, she ceased to exist in any way she understood. There was no sensation of falling, no impact, no sound. Just a slow, steady dissolution of self-like being submerged in a warm bath of ink, memory, and grief. The world didn't spin or fade, folded. She felt her body collapse into symbols, her name broke into vowels. Her memories unraveled into thread, and when she came back into herself, she was somewhere else. Not the hollow, not the house. Somewhere. Deeper Elizabeth stood on what looked like soil, but moved like water. Every step pulsed beneath her feet as if the ground had a heartbeat. Above her, a sky of stone pulsed with veins of dim light. The horizon didn't exist on the endless ridges of shadow, like tree roots tangled together and stretching in all directions. Around her, shapes moved. Some walked like people. Others crawled. All of them hunched and trembling, wrapped in veils of memory. Faces flickered over their bodies, hundreds at once, like borrowed skins. Some were children, others were old. Some had no faces at all, and every one of them was humming. A low, broken version of the lullaby, Elizabeth turned slowly in place. The only direction she could trust was down. She began to walk. The terrain shifted. With her, sometimes it felt like she was sinking. Sometimes she was climbing, though the incline made no sense. Her flashlight, somehow still in her hand, worked though its beam bent awkwardly, refracted by the thick air. After what felt like hours or maybe minutes, she saw the door, the same one from the mirror, covered in vines. Ironwood frame, a handle. Shaped like an open mouth, she approached carefully. The figures didn't follow her. They stood at a distance, heads bowed, humming louder. Elizabeth reached for the handle. The door opened on its. The room beyond wasn't a room. It was a memory, specifically. Her bedroom, not the current one. Not the dusty, abandoned relic in her mother's house. The one from when she was 7. Stuffed animals, posters, a glitter lamp in the corner. The air smelled like crayons and sugar cereal. On the bed sat a girl, 10 years old, blonde hair. Pajamas, Melanie. But not Melanie. This version was too still. Too calm. She looked up at Elizabeth and smiled. I've been waiting. Elizabeth stepped inside. You're not my sister. The girl tilted her head. I was. Once, now I'm better. I understand the root. What is it? The girl shrugged. It's everything people bury. The pain, the memories, the lies they never say out loud. It feeds on forgetting. And what does it want from me? You're the first one who came looking. Everyone else got pulled in. But you, she smiled wider. You came on. Purpose! Elizabeth stepped closer. Where's the real Melanie? The girl pointed at the closet door. Behind the thing you don't want to remember. Elizabeth hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the knob. Then the humming outside stopped. Hazel, in the chamber above, gasped and dropped to her knees. The fire ring around the root gate flickered. She's close to it, she whispered. To what? Caleb asked, kneeling beside her. To the seed. Elizabeth opened the closet. Inside, a stairwell, but not stone. Flesh, the steps were made of layered tissue, pale and veined. The walls pulsed. As she descended, the air grew warmer, wetter, heavier, and the sounds began again. Whispers at first, then voices. All her own voice. Different ages. Different tones. Each one reliving a memory she hadn't thought about in years. Her first lie, her first betrayal. The day she didn't answer Melanie's call for help. Each step deeper tore something from her. But she kept going. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a chamber, and in the center, a cocoon. It pulsed. 12. Feet tall, hung from the ceiling by black roots. It was transparent, barely on, inside. As curled like a sleeping child was Melanie, the real one. Elizabeth rushed forward, the air pushed. Her back, a voice filled the chamber, not spoken aloud, but projected directly into her mind. You came. You remember? Elizabeth clenched her fists. I'm here for her. The voice was quiet, calm. You are her. You always have been. No, you're the one who left. You're the one who lived. She became the memory you abandoned. The root grew from you, your guilt, your grief. Elizabeth backed away. No, this is real. She's real. The cocoon shifted. Melanie's eyes opened, and she whispered, I forgive you. Up in the chamber, the fire around the root gate extinguished. Caleb shouted, What does that mean? Ode paled. The hollows found her. Elizabeth stepped forward again. What do I have to do to release her? The voice answered. Take her place. The cocoon split. Vines lashed out, coiling around Elizabeth's arms, her waist, her neck. She screamed. The flashlight dropped. The last thing she saw before the light went out was Melanie falling from the cocoon onto the ground. Coughing, blinking, breathing, alive, free, and then Elizabeth was lifted off her feet. Caleb reached for the root gate just in time to see Melanie rise from it, soaking wet, gasping, eyes wide with terror. He and Hazel pulled her out. Where's Liz? He asked. Melanie clutched his hand. She saved me. Hazel looked at the gate. The surface had gone black. No ripple, no return. That night, they carried Melanie out of the house. She didn't speak for hours, just stared into space, fingers gripping the bracelet Elizabeth had given her. Hazel left again, promising to do what she could to watch the root gate for any signs of activity. Caleb stayed behind alone. Alone in a house that no longer creaked, no longer whispered, no longer breathed. Until the next morning, when he found the new journal on the kitchen table, written in Elizabeth's handwriting, I'm still here, damed beneath the seed. Tell her I'm sorry I didn't answer the call sooner. Melanie didn't speak for 3 days, not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. She stayed in the guest room of Caleb Moore's cabin. Curled beneath heavy blankets, the same twisted bracelet Elizabeth had tied to her wrist clutched, tight in her hand. Her eyes didn't close, not even when she slept. Her breath came slow and shallow. Sometimes her lips moved like she was praying, but no sound came. Caleb kept the TV off, kept the lights low, kept the room warm. He waited. On the 4th morning, just as dawn cracked the edge of the forest and bled orange across the porch, Melanie whispered one word. Root. He was at her side in seconds. What about it? She looked at him for the first time since escaping. She's not dead. Caleb called Hazel immediately. She's awake. She's coherent. Is she? Herself? Hazel asked. I think so. Ask her something only the real Melanie would know. Caleb paused, then covered the phone. Melanie, what's the name of the dog you and Liz tried to hide from your mom? Melanie blinked slowly, then said, Frisbee. Caleb returned. To the phone, she's back. Hazel didn't answer for a long moment. Then the root still has a tether. Elizabeth's still alive. They met that night, Caleb. Melanie. And Hazel stood at the edge of the Kane house property. Outside the circle, Hazel had burned into the ground during their first containment. The ground hadn't shifted. The trees still leaned away from the house. The air was still too quiet. Hazel spread out the map from the old journal again. The one with the 12 root sites, marked around red pines. If Elizabeth's trapped below, she said she's likely near the seed chamber. The cocoon place? Caleb asked. Hazel nodded. It's the root's heart. She took. Melanie's place? It would have sealed her there.
Ow.
But if she left a tether? Melanie spoke for the first time in hours. She left more than one. Hazel and Caleb looked at her. She left the charm with me. But she also left herself in the house. I felt it every time I tried to scream. Every time I tried to claw my way back. She left a version of herself behind to hold the root open. That's how I got out. So we can get her back, Caleb said. Melanie hesitated. Maybe, but it'll cost us. The next night, they descended into the root again. This time, it's with a new plan. Hazel had prepared a binding ring using hair from Elizabeth's old hairbrush and ink from the journals in the false basement room. Memory-based conjuring, she explained, not a spell. A request. Caleb brought the charm. Melanie brought the voice. And at exactly 2:14 a.m., they entered the root gate. It was different this time. Colder, deeper. The air inside was thicker than before. The ground pulsed with grief. The stone pillars surrounding the gate had cracked in half. One was missing completely. And the moment they stepped inside, the chanting began. Not humming. Words they echoed from every direction in dozens of voices. Young, old, male, female, all whispering in perfect unison. Seed must sleep. Root must feed. Mirror cracked, memory freed. Hazel flinched. It knows we're back. Caleb pulled Melanie forward. Do you know the way? Melanie didn't answer. She just walked, and the route opened before her. They followed the same path Elizabeth had taken weeks before through the bone-laced soil. The breathless caverns, past the chamber where Elizabeth had faced her Nazi Esther. The path seemed to recognize them. Doors opened. Nothing resisted. Not until they reached the bottom of the stairwell. The seed chamber had changed. The cocoon was gone. In its place stood a tree, made entirely of human hair. At the base of the tree sat a mirror flat, round-rimmed in bone, and inside it Elizabeth, curled on the ground, eyes closed, her face twisted in pain. She's dreaming, Melanie whispered. She's trapped in a loop, Hazel said. The root keeps her asleep, feeding on what she remembers. So how do we break the loop? Hazel looked down at the charm, then at the tree. Someone has to wake her up from the outside. Caleb volunteered. He stepped forward, holding the charm tight. As he approached the tree, the voices grew louder. The chant shifted. Name is key. Speak and flee. Call her whole. Call her free. He knelt by the mirror, touched the surface, and whispered, Elizabeth Morgan Kane. She gasped. Her eyes shot open. She blinked rapidly, and then she screamed. Above them, the root shook. The mirror cracked. The tree split, and the chamber began to collapse. Hazel grabbed Caleb. Help her up. Now. Melanie reached into the mirror, hands trembling. Elizabeth looked up, disoriented, pale, but alive. Their hands met, and the root screamed. They didn't remember how they got out. One moment, they were in the chamber. The next, they were back. In the house, in the attic, all four of them, breathless, shaking, covered in something that smelled like smoke, and moss and old tears. The mirror was shattered. The floorboards had caved in, and outside, dawn was breaking. Elizabeth spent the next 3 days in silence, not fear, not reflection. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and wrote journal. After journal, the others watched her but didn't interfere. Then on the fourth night she spoke. They weren't all evil. Caleb frowned. What? The things in the root, the ones that looked like people, they weren't all monsters. Some of them were echoes. People who got lost, people who gave up. They still remembered, but not enough to come back. Hazel nodded solemnly. It feeds on what's unresolved. Elizabeth looked at her sister, and we were its favorite meal. They made a decision the next day. It wasn't enough to seal the attic. It wasn't even enough to destroy the root gate beneath the house. There were 12 known root sites. If one of them had nearly taken everything from them, what were the others still feeding on? Elizabeth stood in front of the house. One final time, the mirror pieces had been buried. The root gate had been collapsed with salt, concrete, and fire. The journals were locked in Hazel's care, and the Kane house would never be occupied again, but as she turned away, she thought she saw someone standing in the attic window, watching, waiting, wearing her face. The dream began the night after Elizabeth left the house for good. She was standing in a forest, barefoot, the ground slick with rain. The trees arched overhead like cathedral rafters, their bark carved with names some familiar, most not. Every trunk had a symbol, a spiral swallowing an eye. The mark of the hollow, at the center of the clearing, stood a mirror. Not a large one, just tall enough to see her face. She walked toward it inside. Her reflection smiled, then whispered, "There are more of us." Elizabeth jolted awake in a motel. Off Route 3, her breath catching in her throat. She checked her phone. It's 14 a.m., the same time the route gate opened weeks ago. The air in the room felt wrong. Still, she reached for her journal. Flipped past entries marked with weather reports, observations, and symbols she barely remembered writing. At the end of the last page, she found a new message, "They dreamed to," and underneath it a list of locations. By noon, she was at Caleb's cabin. He opened the door before she knocked. "You felt it too," he said. Elizabeth nodded. "It's not done." Hazel was already inside, poring over old maps and scribbled notes from the route journals they'd recovered from the hidden basement chamber. Melanie sat silently on the couch, staring out the window. None of them had slept well in days. Caleb unrolled a new map across the dining table. "These," he said, pointing to 7 marked towns, "are the other route sites Hazel's been able to confirm. But there's something strange each. One lines up with a known missing persons cluster. Not 1 or 2. Dozens," Hazel added. "Most of them children, ages 9 to 11. Just like Melanie, just like all the Hollow victims Hazel had studied." Over the past 40 years, Elizabeth stared at the map. "We thought it was a house," she whispered. "But it's a network, system." Hazel leaned forward. "It's a nervous system. And we've only amputated 1 limb." Over the following weeks, the 4 of them formed a plan. They wouldn't just research route sites. They would find them and close them. For good, Hazel called them the mirror wakes. It's places where root energy surfaced, allowing the hollower worst to peek through. Sometimes a mirror, sometimes a doorway, sometimes just a room where time slipped and names were forgotten. They created a framework. Melanie would keep record of dreams. She was still the most connected to the roots. Signals, Hazel would handle rituals, readings, protections. Caleb would scout physical locations and document disturbances. Elizabeth would confront whatever emerged. They called themselves a dozen things: the Threadkeepers, the Hollow Watch, the Chain. But ultimately, didn't matter what name they used. The route had already learned theirs. The first new site was, in Wisconsin, an abandoned elementary school. Shuttered in the 1970s after a series of unexplained disappearances. 4 children vanished in 1 semester, all of them from the same 3rd grade class. Hazel confirmed residual root energy before they even stepped inside. Elizabeth felt it before they opened the door. Cold air, dry static. The taste of ash in the middle of what had once been the library. They found a mirror wedged behind a crumbling shelf. Small, oval, ringed in teeth. Not figurative. Actual teeth. Melanie cried the moment she touched it. "There's someone inside," she whispered. "She's still alive." Hazel held up her charm. "No rescue missions," she warned. "Not this time." But Elizabeth was already reaching for it. She saw the girl instantly. No older than 10, curled in the corner of a classroom that no longer existed, hands over her ears, eyes wide with fear. But what terrified Elizabeth more was what stood behind her. Aversion for self. Thin, pale, wearing the same coat she'd worn the day she found the mirror in her attic. The copy turned toward Elizabeth and smiled. "You can't keep killing us," it said. "We're what's left of you." Then it shattered, and the mirror in her hand turned to dust. That night, Elizabeth didn't sleep. She saw faces behind her eyes, hers, Melanie's, her mother's, 1,000 variations. While watching, while remembering, Hazel told her to stop using her real name. During rituals, it listens. And names hold weight here. Melanie started calling her E. Caleb called her Liz. Hazel just called her Girl. But the root always called her US. Over the next 3 months, they closed 4 more sites. A collapsed farmhouse in Maine, where every mirror was turned toward the ceiling. A dried-up lake in Utah, where names whispered from the mud. A motel in Nebraska that had been abandoned mid-check-in receipts. Still at the front desk, car keys in drawers, but no trace of the guests, and a mine in Oregon where no flashlight ever worked past the 5th level. In each place, they found echoes, versions of Elizabeth, variations of Melanie. Some begged for help, others attacked. One simply wept and whispered, "We were never meant to leave." But it was the 6th site that changed everything. A psychiatric hospital in upstate New York, shut down in 1951. The root signature there was strong hazel. Said it felt raw, like a wound that never closed. She found a mirror that wasn't a mirror at all. It was a well, lined in silver, and at the bottom, staring up at her, her mother not dead, not alive, somewhere between. "You broke the chain," her mother whispered. But the root remembers. Then the floor collapsed, and Elizabeth fell. She awoke in the motel again, same as the dream from weeks. Before forest, trees carved with names, the spiral swallowing the eye, the mirror at the center of the clearing. This time, her reflection didn't smile. It begged, "Don't stop. Don't forgive it. Don't let us out." Elizabeth kept a new journal now, one made of entries not by her, but of the ones she couldn't save. Each page started with a name and ended with a drawing. The spiral, a seed, or sometimes a lock. The root, she had realized, wasn't just growing, it was learning. Each time they severed one connection, made another. Each name it took became part of its structure, a lattice of stolen identity, and the more she saw her own face in its reflections, the more she wondered if she was just another version. They returned to the A. Kane house one final time, not to fight, not to open, but to bury. Hazel led the ritual. Caleb brought the last of the mirror dust. Melanie sealed the root gate with a lock made from their childhood bracelets. Fused in fire and memory, Elizabeth stood over the floorboards of the attic, now fully sealed. "I used to think it wanted out," she said. "Now I think it just wants us to keep looking." "Why?" Melanie asked. Elizabeth turned to her. "Because as long as we look, we stay close. And if we're close, it's never alone." That night, back at the cabin, Melanie found a note on her pillow. No envelope, no signature, just a single sentence in Elizabeth's handwriting. "We were the wound and the stitch." And beneath it, the faint outline of a new map, with 3 more root sites marked in red. The 3 new root sites were located far from one another, spread across the country, like punctuation marks at the end of an unfinished sentence. A forgotten chapel in rural Louisiana, submerged in swamp water, a Cold War-era communications bunker in the Nevada desert, and a stretch of road in northern Vermont where no signal, light, sound had been reported for 30 years. Elizabeth stared at the map by the firelight, fingers tracing the lines between locations. Hazel sat quietly nearby, frowning at the notes. Melanie stood at the cabin window, unmoving. Caleb paced the room. "This pattern isn't random," Hazel finally said. "It's forming something." "What?" Caleb asked. Elizabeth met Hazel's eyes. "A circle." Hazel nodded, the roots closing in. "They chose to go to Vermont first. The others were dangerous, yes, but the Vermont site moved. Tied to a building or landmark, it was tied to a stretch of road. Locals called it the Gray Mile. No one drove it. GPS rerouted around it. Maps marked it as private. Every year, a fresh layer of asphalt appeared on the Gray Mile without any trace of who laid it. Rumors said anyone who walked it at night never came back. So Elizabeth walked it at night alone. She stepped onto the Gray Mile just after 11 p.m. Melanie and Caleb waited in the SUV, parked a safe distance behind. Hazel stood at the boundary of the road, reading faint pulses from her compass. "Don't go more than a mile in," Hazel warned. "You'll lose your tether." Elizabeth nodded, then turned off her flashlight and walked forward. The road was dead silent. No insects, no wind, just her footsteps on pavement. Then -40-7 steps in it. Started to rain upward. She stopped. Drops of water lifted from the asphalt and floated into the sky. Her breath came out in fog, even though the summer night was warm. And in the distance where the road bent left, she saw A light, not headlights. A mirror, hanging in midair, turning slowly on its own. She approached. Cautiously, the mirror reflected the road behind her, only. She wasn't in it. Instead, it showed a version of the SUV. Empty. Abandoned. Doors open. She turned around. The SUV was still there, Caleb and Melanie inside. When she turned back, the mirror now reflected her mother, standing behind Elizabeth, smiling hands clasped behind her back. Elizabeth spun, but no one was there. Then the voice returned, not in her head this time, spoken aloud. From the trees on either side of the road, dozens of voices. Trade truth for lie. One must die. Elizabeth gritted her teeth. No trades. No tricks. No doors. The mirror shattered, and the sky turned black. Hazel's compass cracked in half. As the shockwave rolled over them back in the SUV, Melanie clutched her head and screamed. Caleb leaped out of the vehicle, running toward the road, but Hazel stopped. She's doing what it can't, she said. She's not forgetting. Elizabeth stood alone now, surrounded by black sky and dissolving road. The root was here, but not like before. No tendrils. No cocoon. Just a stage at its center. A child. Blonde. Dirty. Shivering. Elizabeth knew her. Herself. Age 7. The version of her that had found Melanie crying in the crawl space. The root had taken that moment and preserved it. The child looked up at her. You should have let me stay. I didn't know, Elizabeth whispered. You forgot. We all did. The ground split open beneath the child. She fell. Elizabeth dove after her hand caught her hand. The moment their skin touched, vision shattered. Elizabeth awoke on the side of the road. Caleb was shaking her. Hazel crouched nearby. Melanie stared at the forest, wide-eyed. You were gone for 3 hours, Caleb said. We thought. Elizabeth sat up. No more mirrors, she whispered. It's changing again, using us against ourselves. Hazel looked at her carefully. What did it show you? Elizabeth didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Melanie. You said something, but Liz left more than one version of herself behind. Melanie nodded. I felt them when I was in the root. Pieces of you trapped. In different places, different ages. Hazel went still. It's making duplicates, she said. Not just memories, fragments, copies. Each time you go in, it takes more. They gathered the next night to regroup. The chapel in Louisiana was inaccessible, now flooded under 30 feet of water in the Nevada site. Gone, not destroyed. Missing, the entire bunker had collapsed inward. Satellite photos showed nothing but scorched desert. Hazel's voice trembled. It's retreating. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? It's hiding the rest of itself, pulling back. That means one of two things. Either we're winning, or it's preparing something worse, Elizabeth finished. Then Melanie had a dream, different from the others. Not memory, not root, but future she saw. Elizabeth, older, alone, standing at the center of a circle of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of her. They chanted in unison, not to call something forth, but to contain it. And in the dream, Melanie heard a name, one she didn't. No, she wrote it down. Hazel read it aloud the next morning and went white. This isn't over, she said, not by a long shot. Caleb looked from her to the others. What is it? Hazel looked at Elizabeth. It's the original mirrors. Name the one your mother sealed away. It's the one she didn't destroy. Elizabeth's heart dropped. You mean there's another? Hazel nodded. The first one. They left that night back to Red Pines. Back to the Kane house, back to where it began. Because beneath all the layers of the root, beneath the cocoon, the seed, the mirrors, the copies, there was still something waiting, watching, wanting. Elizabeth stood in the basement again, flashlight in one hand, charm in the other. The mirror was gone. The wall where it had been was solid, but the air buzzed. Something had returned, or maybe it had never left. Hazel began preparing the final ritual. Whatever's still inside here, she said. It's Elizabeth Kane, not just in the center of her childhood basement. It grew from. We're not just surrounded by symbols older than any language she could name. We're sealing me. The air was heavy with salt. Iron, ash. Hazel worked in silence, drawing sigils across the floorboards with black root ink that smoked upon contact. Caleb placed mirrors face down in the corners, each one broken diagonally with a hammer. Melanie stood in the stairwell watching, clutching the melted charm that once tied her to Elizabeth's wrist. The Kane house hadn't made a sound in 12 hours, not a creak, not a whisper, not even the wind. That was how Hazel knew the mirror was awake, because silence was how it hunted now. This is the last one, Hazel said quietly, placing the final charm in a circle of coal. Elizabeth nodded. Are you sure it's the first? Hazel hesitated. No, but I know it's the one your mother never destroyed, the one the root grew from. And if it's still here, then so am I, Elizabeth finished. Caleb looked at her. You don't have to be the anchor this time. I do, she said. I'm not just the tether anymore. I'm the wound it came from. Melanie's voice cracked. That's not true. Elizabeth turned to her. It is. But now I get to be the one who stitches it closed. At 2:14 a.m., the mirror reappeared, not on the wall, not in a frame, in the air. A ripple. A vertical seam in space. A slow, unfolding sliver of silver that split the room like a wound reopening. Everyone felt it. The drop in pressure, the low hum, the sharp taste of metal in their mouths. Elizabeth stepped forward, crossing into the containment circle. Don't. Speak your name, Hazel reminded her. Elizabeth smiled faintly. I don't think it matters anymore. It already knows me. The mirror rippled, and Elizabeth vanished. She woke up in the woods, same dream as before. Tall trees. Spiral eyes carved in bark, cold fog drifting low. The mirror stood at the center of the clearing, spinning slowly. But this time, it wasn't reflecting her. It reflected every version of her. The child who found Melanie crying in the crawl space. The teenager who left Red Pines and never looked back. The teacher who returned. The woman who stood in the hollow. And the woman who never left it. They all looked back at her, waiting, judging, bleeding. Double quotes. Why did you come back? One asked. Elizabeth stepped forward. Because I'm tired of running from us. From me. The ground split open. The mirror cracked. The forest folded. And Elizabeth stood in the seed chamber once more. This time, there was no cocoon. No. Tree. Only her mother. Kneeling beside a pool of still water. She looked up and smiled. You found it? Elizabeth's throat tightened. I thought you were gone. I am. Then what is this? Her mother looked down at the pool. It's the last piece of you. Elizabeth looked in the water. She saw herself fragmented, splintered. You want to come home? Her mother asked. Elizabeth hesitated. No. Her mother nodded. You're not here to return. You're here to bury it. The air changed. The roots screamed from every tunnel, every fracture, every cracked piece of mirror, and every dimension of its body. Caleb felt it from the basement. Hazel's compass shattered. Melanie fell to her knees, crying without knowing why. Inside the root, Elizabeth stood alone, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. You wanted to be remembered, she said aloud. You used our pain, our grief. You wore our faces. You made us forget who we were, the root hissed. And you loved it. I did. The water shimmered. I did love you, because you were me. You were the broken parts I never let heal. She stepped into the pool. But I'm not yours anymore. Hazel began the final seal. A ring of fire surrounded the basement. Symbols blazed. On the walls, Caleb and Melanie chanted together, following the pattern Hazel had taught them. Seed to salt. Memory to ash. Truth to stone. Mirror to grave. Inside the pool, Elizabeth reached down. Her reflection stared back, whole now. One version. One name. She pressed her palm to the water and whispered, Sleep. The root trembled. Cracks spread. Across its walls, the forest fell. The chamber burned. And every stolen face, every false Elizabeth. Every fragment of Melanie, every child trapped in a forgotten name, was released. One by one, they turned to light and vanished. Hazel collapsed as the mirror in the basement imploded. Gone. No. No gate, no ripple, just scorched wood and still air. Caleb pulled Elizabeth from the ashes. She was breathing alive and smiling. The Kane house was leveled 1 week later, the property sealed by the state. Declared unstable, the mirrors were all destroyed, the journals buried, and the root silent. For now. Elizabeth moved to a quiet town in northern Oregon. Hazel retired to a cabin by a lake. Caleb returned to work. Melanie started drawing again. They kept in touch. Rarely spoke of it, but none of them forgot, especially not Elizabeth, because even in peace, she still dreamed of mirrors. Sometimes, when she woke up, there'd be a name scrawled on her wall, in ash, sometimes her own, sometimes someone else's, sometimes one she didn't recognize. But she always wrote them down and kept the list safe, because she knew the root was patient. It didn't need mirrors to return, just memory, just time, and someone willing to look.